I made dinner and went back up to my room, but as soon as I reached the hallway, I felt a chill run through me. The door was open again, and I froze, staring down the dark hallway for perhaps a minute. I thought I was going crazy because everything was just getting to my head, and I really didn't want to give in to the feelings of anxiety I was having, which I thought were unjustified. Place was haunted. I never believed in that stuff, but that was before living in a creepy-ass 100-year-old mansion in the middle of the woods. I quietly walked back up to the spare room, pushing the door more open and looking in. It looked exactly the same as it did before I walked in, and looked for any subtle signs like a dirty shoe print or something that had been moved, but I found nothing at all. Only getting more uneasy, I left and went to my room. Closing and locking the door, I sent a text to my parents, not trying to sound. I think I was in my room for about 10 minutes, sitting on the bed with the TV on, eating, when I heard what sounded exactly like footsteps in the hallway. I asked them if they noticed the spare room door opening, if there was a problem with it, or something, and they quickly replied that they hadn't noticed anything and weren't really sure what I was talking about. I told them not to worry about it, and it was probably nothing, but honestly, I was becoming more uneasy by the minute. I reached for the remote control and paused the TV just long enough to hear a thump outside my bedroom door. My heart was pounding, and there was a long silence during which there were no sounds in the house, making me too terrified to move. Then, someone outside my room gently and slowly knocked on the other side of the door as if they were tapping on it. I couldn't believe this was happening. It was so strange that I wasn't sure how to respond. They didn't knock or tap on the door for what seemed like a minute after that, so finally I called out, "Who's out there?" "I've called the police already," which is obviously a lie, but I hoped to get them to leave. I knew that I would have to call the police eventually, but it didn't seem like it would help right now because it would take them at least 10 to 15 minutes to arrive, so I had to wait alone. The only response I received was 3 more knocks on the door, all of which were in the same slow, collected manner before I finally made the decision to call the police. I reasoned that if they were just going to stand there and wait, then this was the best thing I could do. I spoke with an operator who gave my address and everything, and as I was explaining that they were just standing outside my bedroom door, I heard a loud scratching sound against the wood. It was a long scratch, as if they were scraping something against the door, and I started to freak out, begging them to come here right away. The door handle began to move back and forth, but thank God I locked it, and another minute or so went by before 3 more knocks tapped against the door, and then it was quiet again. It remained quiet for the entire 10 minutes. The officers tried to investigate where they could have gotten inside the house because there were so many entrances and windows, and most of the windows had outdated and unreliable locking mechanisms. Eventually, no real leads or anything were found, so my parents flew home as soon as they could, and nothing else happened. I waited for the police to arrive, but when they did, there was no one outside my bedroom anymore. The only sign left by them was a long gash carved into the backside of the door, clearly from a knife. A week after the incident, I thought I saw someone standing in the woods near the window, but it was dark, so maybe it was just a shadow. Fortunately, I no longer live there, and my parents sold the house a few months ago, so whatever was going on with that house or whoever was stalking us in it will remain unknown. Music. I never felt safe in that house anymore. Every dark hallway and empty room felt even more eerie, and the woods surrounding the house were just unsettling. Second story, by John O. It was a pretty normal Friday night for me. I lived alone in a really small home in the suburbs but worked an hour away in the city. Finally reaching the weekend, I was ready to do absolutely nothing tonight and just watch YouTube, game, and maybe sleep in. I took a quick shower after getting home, then fired up the PlayStation and relaxed and gamed for a few hours. I even cracked open a few beers. The night was going pretty well, and I thought the only thing that could make it perfect was to get some pizza. After 45 minutes, I realized it had been a while since I had placed the order and hadn't received any texts indicating it was on its way, so I took out my phone and checked the app. It stated there was a delay. I can't recall the exact message, but it was pretty generic and essentially said, "Sorry for the delay, your order will be on the way soon." I placed my order from a local pizza place using their app, then relaxed on the couch and watched YouTube on the TV while I waited. It wasn't a big deal. I was trying to stay up late anyhow, even though I could feel my eyes getting heavy. YouTube was playing in the background as I slowly fell asleep, and when the doorbell rang several times, I jumped up from the couch and thought, oh, the pizza delivery. I had no idea how long I had been unconscious or how long the delivery man had been waiting for me, so I rushed to the door and opened it, still feeling very groggy, and experiencing the few beers earlier didn't help at all. A man was standing on my porch, and I apologized, "I hope you weren't waiting long," and asked, "How much do I owe you?" The man looked a little confused, so I explained that he wasn't holding any pizza boxes or anything else. As I was saying it, I realized that he wasn't even wearing a uniform. Instead, he was wearing dark jeans, a gray hoodie that was flipped over his head, and his hands in his pockets. He didn't respond for a strangely long time, as if he was still processing what I had said. Then, with a smile, he said, "Don't worry, the pizzas are still on the way." He then stopped talking and simply looked at me as though I was a little inebriated and exhausted. I knew that was a strange response, but I just said, "Okay." After a few more awkward seconds of silence, I closed the door, rubbed my face, and tried to think about why that interaction was so strange. I knew that I wasn't in the right frame of mind, but regrettably that made I put on a new video, sat down, and watched it until I fell asleep again. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had only been asleep for a few minutes because the video was still playing. I sat up again and waited for a knock or a doorbell, but there wasn't one. I still didn't know what that click sound was, but that's when I finally remembered to check the app for any updates on the order, so I opened my phone. It was 4 a.m., but they couldn't even get beyond the lock screen without getting confused. The pizza establishment didn't open until 1 a.m., so I placed my order at 11 o'clock. As soon as I saw on the app that the order had been delayed for an hour before the store canceled it, I got up from the couch and went to the front door to check the peephole. Since there was nobody there, I reached down to unlock and opened the door, but it was already unlocked. I was so drunk and exhausted that I had forgotten to lock it when I answered the door a few minutes ago. I opened it and looked outside, but all I saw was a quiet and empty neighborhood. I was too exhausted and inebriated to deal with whatever was going on, so I closed the door and immediately stopped in my tracks when I heard the door click into the doorway. That was the exact sound that woke me up, and I briefly felt my face turn pale. I replayed the entire exchange with the man after realizing I looked back into the dark, quiet house and told him that he was just going along with being the pizza delivery guy after I had already mentioned it. I had every instinct to leave, so I walked quietly back down the hallway, trying to get my phone off the couch, but as soon as I heard something move in the other room, I panicked, grabbed my phone, and ran out of the house, down to the end of the block, and dialed 911. The police arrived fairly quickly, just a few minutes later. I gave them every detail I could think of, including his appearance, his words, and everything else, but as of right now, that's all we have. Unless something else happens, I think we'll be left at that. I spent the entire night trying to figure out what actually happened, but I don't know. It seems like the order being cancelled was just a really bad coincidence. The biggest question is why this random guy was outside my house ringing the doorbell at 4 a.m. First of all, what was he originally planning? I'm going to assume that he was looking for vacant homes or easy targets to rob, or worse, when I walked in the door, he probably could tell that I was intoxicated, exhausted, and not in the right frame of mind, so he thought he could take advantage of that. I'm even willing to wager that he waited outside the door and listened to see if I locked it, then he simply waited for me to fall back asleep. If I hadn't woken up or realized the situation I was in that night, things would have probably gone very differently. Story 3 by Victoria M. would not have gone well for me. I found the cheapest apartment possible and rented the smallest room when I moved to a new town in the middle of 2019 for a job opportunity. There were only 4 units in the complex, all of which were very old and outdated and, to be honest, not in a very nice area. For the first 3 months, I was the only resident of the complex. The other 3 units were vacant, which made me feel a little uneasy about the situation. But it was only intended to be temporary until I saved enough money for my new job, so I held out. However, Work ended up being much more stressful than I had anticipated, with many late nights and overtime and just not the best working environment. I didn't have much time in my apartment other than sleeping one night when I arrived home at 8 p.m., exhausted and hardly conscious. I took off my shoes and went down the hall to my room when I heard a knock on my apartment door. I stumbled back to the door after being startled awake by how unexpected it was. Upon entering, I saw no one outside, and through the peephole, I could barely see anything. I believe the glass was either broken or had a stain or something covering it, but I couldn't tell who it was. I opened the door and saw an older man, who appeared to be in his late 40s to early 50s, standing very close to the doorway. His eyes were very striking, not in a good way, but in an unnerving way. "How can I help you?" he asked after a moment. "Lived here." I thought that was a pretty odd question, but I just said, "Yeah." Without giving it much thought, he smiled at me and said he was moving into the apartment next to mine and just wanted to introduce himself. He then waved awkwardly goodbye as he went down to the apartment next to mine. Strangely, he never really introduced himself, gave me his name, or anything. I just thought he was a strange old man, but nothing to worry about. In fact, it was somewhat relieved that someone else had moved into this apartment. That night, I ate dinner and went to bed early because I had another long day of work. The next day, I returned at about the same time, but this time, as I was climbing the outdoor stairs to my unit, I noticed blinds moving in the window to the unit next to mine. The old man claimed to have moved into that unit, and the way the blinds were swaying made it look like he was staring out the window at me. I hurried up to my door and entered, feeling a little uneasy, but I told myself it was probably nothing. Overthink it, but I was only inside for maybe 30 seconds when there was a knock on the door. I went back to the door and, out of habit, looked out the peephole once more, only to be reminded that I couldn't see anything. I opened the door before realizing it was probably the same man as last night. "Is there something you need?" "I'm just in a bit of a rush at the moment," I said, trying not to be impolite, but I really didn't want to talk to anyone after a long day at work. The man nodded and smiled, but then asked if I could show him because he thought he had already tried what I had just said. I reminded him that I was in a hurry, and he apologized, but he was being a little pushy and passive-aggressive. "Will you happen to know how the thermostat works in these units?" "I must be too old to figure it out," he said with a slight chuckle, hoping that this was as harmless a question as it seemed. Claiming that it would only take 30 seconds and that he truly needed my assistance. To be fair, it was winter and quite cold outside, so I would feel terrible if he truly couldn't get his thermostat to work. After a while, I folded and said, "All right." He led me down the balcony to his apartment, and I suppose I just assumed that would make him leave me alone. The door was already open when he entered, but I froze in the entryway as soon as I realized that his apartment was empty, not even a moving box or any furniture anywhere, and it was filthy with paint peeling off the walls. It was obvious from the look of it that this apartment had never been rented out, and what was even stranger was the foul smell coming from the doorway. The man saw my hesitation and turned to face me, saying, "Come on, it's right here." I was at a loss for words, trying to think of a reason why I should not enter, so he repeated the invitation, but in the most unnerving and chilling way possible. His expression changed from one of friendliness to one of dark disappointment. He took a stride forward, and I immediately ran out of the doorway, got into my apartment, and locked the door behind me. A few seconds later, the door handle clicked back and forth, and he attempted to open it. I called the police, but the man paused for a minute, as if he was listening in on what I was doing. He knocked on the door a few more times, and then I heard his footsteps go away, and it remained silent until the police arrived. By that time, it turned out that I was correct that the unit was. I think there's no question that things could have gotten much worse had I entered that unit with him, or had I just let things go on for any longer. Who knows what he was planning, but he had broken in and been staying there for a few days, probably watching me to see when I left and got home from work every day. I moved out of there as soon as I could.